Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today I'm going to show you all about getting your quilt top loaded onto a quilting machine, picking out a backing, picking out a binding, and getting all these tops finished up. If you're like me and you enjoy making patchwork, you might get a lot of quilt tops built up because I sometimes want to finish the top and get on to the next quilt top. So I end up with a big stack like this, and we need to pick out a backing. So let's do this quilt first. You can see the colors we've got here, and I'm going to get some bolts and see what might work well for the back. I like to get the whole top done before I even pick the backing. A lot of times I will have a backing color in mind, but once the whole quilt top is done, I will then get several different fabrics. I obviously have them on bolts. You will be doing this at a local fabric store or looking online for something that you think will make a nice backing. So here's some options here. This is a blue color that's in it. It's not a strong blue color in there, but I like the way it has some little stripes there. Sometimes I want a very light backing. This has all the colors. I think this might even be in the quilt top. That would look really good if you want a nice light backing. I do like to go with something that has a large scale, especially on a big quilt like this. That would make a pretty awesome backing. It's got the same colors and it's got those big ferns. So if you flip it over, that's going to have a really awesome look. This is much calmer. This is a smaller print, but again, very good color match. And then if you wanted to go with something real small, this is more colorful. I like the fact that it's got a little bit more color in it. I really think I'm going to go with the big fern for this one. I cut the backing the length of the quilt plus an extra 6 inches, and I've seamed those two pieces together. And I use a big seam allowance here, and I am going to finger press this open. Some fabrics pull a little bit on that selvage edge, and if yours does, you would want to cut off the selvage before you did this. So the reason I use a big seam allowance here is because it's easier to keep that open and flat and not feel an extra lump right there when the quilt is done. So I'm just finger pressing this open. You can also iron it if you like, but I'm just pulling it open, pressing it nice and flat. The next step is to load the back onto the quilting machine. I have a Gamble machine and I'm very happy with it. There are other brands we hear from customers all over. Many people are happy with lots of different brands. There's a lot of good machines. So what I'm going to do is I've got this canvas leader here that's attached to my top roll, and I've marked the middle of one side here with a pin, and this purple mark, that's the middle of the canvas. So I'm going to line those up, and then I'm going to pin my back all along the top here. There's other loading ways you can do this. Some people have some long strips they load with, but I pin along the top here. Once the top is all the way pinned on, I'm going to use the same procedure to pin the bottom edge of the back onto this far canvas. Once the bottom is all pinned on, now I'm just going to reel it up with most of the backing on that bottom roller there. And keep reeling it up till I've got just a couple inches of the top canvas showing. And then I'll tighten this one up. And there's a little lock here I flip so that neither roll will turn now. I've also got some straps with clamps to hold the back nice and smooth this way. So I will put all 4 of those on. And now we've got a nice, flat, stretched out backing. Next step is to get a piece of batting. There's kind of a rule. Every quilter has a little bit different parameters, but generally speaking, you want your backing and your batting to be about 6 inches bigger than your quilt top. So I need my batting 80 by 96. My batting is 96 that way, so I'm just going to cut a piece that's 80 inches. For my machine, I'm going to float the batting on here. So I'm just going to lay it right here. And it's not pinned on, it's not clamped on, it's just laying nice and flat here. And then I'm going to do one stitching line across the top, not to stitch the batting to the backing, just to make a nice straight line for me to line up the quilt on. My Gamble machine comes with a computerized program, and it has different stitching modes. We've got automatic that we use for quilting, and regulated that I use when I want to do a basting stitch. There's also a button you can click called channel lock. So the channel lock will make it so that my machine will go sideways, but not up and down at all. So it will only stitch in a perfectly straight line, and that's what I want right now. So all I have to do is press start, and when I move, because it's on automatic, it's going to just make one straight line all the way across the top of the quilt with a very large stitch. I've folded the quilt top in half also so that I can mark the halfway point there, and then I'll use that pin to line up with my mark on the header so that I know I've got this centered, because this is kind of a big quilt and it can be a little bit hard to center a big one perfectly. So I'm going to line the top up even with my basting stitch up there. And since I've got that pin in the middle, I know I'm going to have about the same amount of excess on both sides. Next step is to baste everything together. So again, I'm using a very long stitch, and I'm just going right along the edges. And this will just tack everything down so that when I'm quilting the quilt, I won't end up possibly flipping something over. And this will keep everything nice and flat around the edges. I've got this quilt loaded on sideways. I call it laying down. And that is because I like to pin the selvage edges of the back onto my canvas. You can load the quilt the other way. You just have to make sure if your back is cut where there aren't selvages up there, that you cut it nice and straight so that you can pin it on nicely. Most patterns when you're quilting don't matter if you have it laying down or standing up. There's a few patterns that have a one-way design. For instance, if you're doing trees, I could not do trees here without them looking like they were sideways when the quilt was done. So we get that question sometimes. How do you know if you lay it on horizontally or vertically? Normally it doesn't matter, but I like those selvage edges pinned onto here. Thread color selection is next, and as always, there's many colors that will work. This is somewhat a matter of preference. There's not usually a right or wrong. There's just what considerations do I have? Do I want it to blend in here and show up a little bit here? So that one is gonna not show it all in the background. This will show a little in the background and not much in the patchwork. And that is usually what I like. I don't like thread fighting with my patchwork. This is a good choice. It's going to be, well, it won't show up on the background at all, and it'll show up there. So if you want your thread to be prominent, that would be a good choice. This is just a bluer, a little bit darker blue. Again, going to blend in there, show a tiny bit there. I think we'll go with the light lavender. I try to avoid re-threading the machine, so I usually tie on the new thread color and then pull it all the way through. Sometimes it won't go through the needle and I'll have to re-thread the needle, but that time it went right through. Now that we have the machine threaded, we need to pick a quilting pattern. My machine came with lots of patterns already on the machine, And this one I think will look really good on this pattern because it has stars that are a little bit skewed there, and I like those curly cues. So the pattern comes, we're going to press reset, and that's the size the pattern was designed for. So I'm going to show you a little bit about this. I'm going to freeze the aspect ratio of it, and I'm going to measure how long my quilt is so we can figure out how many rows do we want to do. I suppose I could measure the quilt before I load it, but I always seem to wait till I get to this spot right here, and I'm just going to use my tape measure. Go all the way down. This one's on the floor a little bit. So we've got 74.5 inches long. The first thing I'm going to do is change this to about 12 inches for the height of the row, because I think 9 is going to be too small. And then I'm going to start adding rows until this is about as long as my quilt. My quilt is 74.5, so now I can just change that to 74.5, and it's going to make each row 12.4 inches tall. My machine has an option for measuring the width, so I'm going to measure it using the machine. I'm just going to click right here, and I'm going to go all the way to the other side. And the computer will tell me if I've got it too high or too low, but I'm on the far edge. When I get that to about 0, I'm going to click OK. And then I can use this to calculate how many repeats we're going to have. We'll just click here, and it's going to do the math, and that's going to fill up the whole quilt. So I will press OK, and then we'll cancel that option, and we'll take it down to just 1 row here, because I can only quilt 1 row at a time, and that is what it's going to do for our first row. So when I press OK here, I've got it right at the start of the quilt. It's going to travel to its starting position, which will be at the very beginning of the first row here. So it should stop right on the edge here. Take 1 stitch. I will floss under to get the bobbin thread up and press start. And the machine will now quilt 1 entire row. When the machine is done with the whole first row, it will stop. I will take off these straps and clamps, and I will use my rollers here to advance it 1 row's worth of space, and then I will start on the second row, and I will keep doing that until the whole quilt is quilted. The first quilt is all quilted, and we'll take a look at it and all the other ones we finish a little bit later on, but right now we need to pick a thread color for this quilt. It's all shades of neutrals. This would be the most extreme thread we could use. It would make a dramatic statement, but I think it's a little too dark for me. This is a nice soft taupe color. That would show a little in the light, not much in the dark. A silvery gray would look nice. This is kind of an oatmeal color. That's going to blend in pretty well in the background. This is another color, similar, a little bit warmer. And then we could even go with a darker gold. There are some darker gold grunges in here. I think this one will look the best. Even though the pattern of the quilt, the patchwork pattern, is called Starburst, I don't want to use stars in the quilting. I want to use something flowery because the prints that are in it are called Date Night. So let me make this a little bigger. So these are fairly simple flowers, and I think that will fill up all the space very nicely. I've already done all the measuring and programmed the quilting pattern, so all I have to do is press start. It'll come all the way to the beginning, and then it'll start quilting, kind of like a player piano. Now we're starting to see the flowers and some of the stems. You can see them a lot better in this more solid background than you can on the prettier parts of the quilt. For the next quilt, it's called Ocean Currents. That's what the patchwork pattern is called. And I've got all these different colors, all of which would work. And with every quilt, there's a variety of choices that will look good. There's not a right or a wrong. I do like this blue. It's not going to show up much there. It's not going to show up much in the dark. And it's only going to show up a little bit there. Same thing with the purple. It's a little bit darker than our very lightest stuff. That would work. This would be the most extreme selection. And I don't think I'm going to like it in the very lightest areas. So that's a little dark for me. This one is going to blend in pretty well, but I have a feeling it's going to show up a little too much there. This would work. I just think the blues will probably be better. Here's a lighter blue. I think this blue will work the best, and that's what I'm going to go with. When I pick a quilting pattern for a quilt, I try to pick something that will look good on the patchwork. Calm Waters is one of my favorites because it's just back and forth, and it does look like ripply water, and this looks really good on batiks. Sometimes I will pick a flowery pattern if the quilt has flowers, a circly pattern if it has circles, and sometimes I'll go the opposite way and use something very geometric on a patchwork pattern that is kind of curvy. Totally a matter of personal preference. I've got the Wave Runner quilt all loaded up, and we need to pick a thread color. There's quite a few threads that will work well on here. This one is not going to show in the light areas at all, but it's pretty prominent in that dark fabric. This will have the opposite effect. It's going to show up there. It's going to blend in a lot better in the dark areas. This one is kind of in the middle, so it doesn't show as much, still shows, blends right in. This is kind of a dull green. That is probably going to blend in really well. That will show the least. I could go with gold. A lot of the prints have kind of a gold background. It's a little bit light. And then I have this variegated thread. Let's find the end of it. Now this has got more blue in it than my quilt does, but when you reel it off and actually look at it, even in the bluest sections, it's not got very much color showing. I really think that this one, even though it's pretty dull, I think that will blend in and show the least, and that's what I want on this quilt. For the quilting pattern, I want to use one that has a lot of quilting and is kind of abstract. This one is called African Maze, and it's just got kind of loose shapes, geometric shapes with a little bit of curve, and I think that will work perfect on this quilt. Here's the finished quilt, and I want to show you something about the thread color. On the edge here, it almost looks like the thread is gold. This is the color I used. Once you get up in here, you can see that it's green. I did use a gold color on the back side. I will often use slightly different colors on the top and the back. I can't use black and white because sometimes in a light area, if I had black on the bottom, you might be able to see it in the little holes where the needle goes through. So I don't use drastically different colors, but a little bit of color change is okay. This is a quilt with a lot of quilting on it. I like a lot of quilting. That's just my preference. A lot of people like it much more open, and it does get a little bit stiff when you put a lot of quilting on it. So people have mentioned to me that if they're going to sleep under it, they might want it quilted wider apart. For binding for this quilt, this would be a good choice color-wise. It's got all the colors that are in it. One of the downsides with this variegated fabric here is the stripes run this way, and I cut my binding this way, so I might have to be a little bit careful so that I don't get some dark and some light binding pieces. I think I'm actually going to go with this. This is the same as the backing, and this is the scrap that I had left over from the backing, and that will be big enough to cut all of my binding pieces. Because it's not the full width, I will have shorter pieces and more seams, but that won't bother me. The next quilt is Showering Stars, and this is pretty big, but we can get an idea of the quilting and the backing and then pick a binding for it. So there's great big stars, and that's why I wanted that large scale print on the back side. That just looks awesome. If you wanted to flip your whole quilt over some days, you'd have a really nice back on it. You can see the stars and swirls here, but they don't pop out too much. I think that was a good choice. It's slightly lighter than the background so that that quilting will show in these big plain areas. For binding, I thought I would use one of these more purpley ones because they match the top of the quilt very nicely. But when I look at the back side, I actually think this one will work a little bit better. This is in the patchwork, so we've got darker purples, we've got blue and green here, but this is in some of the patchwork, so I think that will make nice binding. For the Starburst quilt, I used this nice floral on the back side, and I want to show you some other fabrics I was considering for the backing on this. These are two fabrics that are in the same collection of fabrics I used in the patchwork. It's called Date Night. That would make a great back color-wise. You just have to be a little careful when you have squares going and stripes going both ways that you square it up before you put it on the backing. This would make a nice back also, but I think that flowery print just looks great. This is a quilt that I did the quilting pattern with much more space between all of those lines of quilting, and that makes it nice and soft. This is a bed-size quilt, so I want it to wrap around me if I'm going to use this on my bed to sleep under. For the binding, I've already cut it, and this is exactly the same fabric that's used on this small border here, and so that will look very nice around the edge, and it also looks good with the backside. Ocean Currents, this is the one where we did the wavy quilting on, and it does look really nice. You can see it has a effect of water moving. Looks really nice. I like the darker blue showing in here. It blends in pretty nicely in those dark areas. And let's see about the back. Oh yeah, that really looks cool on the back side of it there. Now I always seam my quilt backs. I always use 45-inch wide fabric. I don't use extra wide backing. Let's see if we can find the seam in it. I normally can't find it that easily by looking. I can't even find it that easily feeling it, but there is a seam here somewhere. The seam is right here, and I had to look a long time before I could find it, so I never worry about putting a seam in my backing. For the binding, I've got a couple of options. This is the darker lavender that's in the quilt. I think that would look good. I could also go with this one that's on the backing. I do often like to have a little bit of contrast so that binding shows, so I'm going to use this one. Now, if you like our videos and you want to support us, the best thing you can do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. That really helps us out. Happy quilting! Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today I'm going to show you how to make a quilt called Emilia. It uses a layer cake, and I have this very pretty one. It's colorful fabrics from Wyndham, and it's called Clover and Dot. The only other things we need some black for these triangles in here, and then see that shadowy area in the border there? And in the sashing, we're going to use this gray, and it's a batik, but I think that'll make a good shadow. Then we need a solid white for the very outside border. We don't need every one of these squares. We only need 36 of them. And the pattern shows the colors grouped in fours. So there's 4 blues, 4 corals, 4 greens. You, of course, could mix them all up, but I'm going to stick with that theme there. So I'm going to pick these out in groups of 4. I've got the squares sorted into stacks of 4, and I'm going to show you how to cut these. Let's start with this blue one here. I've got all 4 pieces. You can cut them individually. I'm going to use all 4 at the same time, and I'm going to line this up on my cutting board. So I've got a line. This is kind of a thicker line, and it's going from corner to corner. Now, we're not cutting on that line. We're going to cut a 1/4 inch away from that line. This is a little unusual, but what you want to do is put your 1/4 inch mark up there on the line and line it up down here on the line, and then just go ahead and make your cut. So we've got some bigger triangles with a little extra on there and some smaller triangles. Next step is to cut out the black, white, and gray. And I can't give you the exact sizes because it's not my pattern, but Robin Pickens patterns are very easy to follow, and they have very nice cutting diagrams included in them. All right, everything is cut and we're ready to get started with the sewing. The first step is to take one of these large black triangles and one of these smaller layer cake triangles, and we're going to put these right sides together, and we're going to stitch along this edge. But before we do that, I need to draw a line right across the middle here. It's easiest if you line up this cut edge along a line on your cutting board and then slide it over so that that tip is on a line, and then we can take our ruler and put it all the way along this line and then draw a light line on the back of it. I'm using a pencil. It will show up enough for me to see when I'm stitching, but I don't know if you can see it very well. Oh yeah, you can. I've got my pieces right sides together, lined up on this long edge, and I'm just going to stitch a 1/4 inch away from the edge. And then stitch along both sides of that drawn line just a 1/4 inch away from it. Now my presser foot is just about a 1/4 inch, so it's real easy to stitch it. Next step is to cut along the drawn line first. We're going to make 3 cuts here, so I'm just going to do that one. Then we're going to take each one of these and cut them in half. So line up the cut edge on a line on your cutting board and slide it over till that point is on a line, and then cut it in half. And what we end up with is 4 half square triangles. So this is a different method for making them than I've ever used, but it's convenient because we only had half of a layer cake to work with. Okay, those are all cut. We got 4 from each set of big triangles, but we only need 3. We had an extra, so I just put it aside. Now all of these need to be trimmed down to 3.5 inches. So you can either iron them open, like I've got here, and then trim it down. It's pretty easy to trim like this. Just line it up on your cutting board, and be sure to trim off some from each triangle. You don't want to line it up like this because you'll be trimming both sides from one fabric. You want to line up these 2 edges here and then just trim it down, and it will be exactly 3.5 inches, and they're very easy to work with when they're perfectly trimmed like this. So you trim off the 2 edges and then get that last little dog ear. But there's another method you can use to trim these. If you have a strip tube ruler or a triangle ruler with the inch marks on it, you can use this to make your half square triangles the correct size. So I'm just going to put the 3.5 inch line on the stitching line, and then I can trim off 2 sides like this, and that's a little bit easier for me. Then I will iron it afterward and just get those dog ears. Either method works. Use whichever one you like the best. Now I'm going to take 3 matching half square triangles and 3 of these black triangles to the sewing machine. We're simply going to make a bigger triangle with these. So we've got these 3 with the print all pointing down, and then we're going to fill in with 3 triangles here. So we're just going to make a row and then put the rows together. So we'll start with these 2 pieces. We always line up the top edges here and let that little bit of extra triangle hang off the edge. So line those up. And this, I like to put it back, grab the next piece so I know I've got it correct. And these 2 are the same size, so that's easy to do. This row only has 2 pieces. Again, line up the top edges. Stitch down that side and put it back. Now, for pressing the seam allowances, we're just going to go every other one. So we're going to press the first row all this way. So I'm just going to use my fingernail, press everything in place. Same thing here, press it down. So that means on this row, we want to press the opposite way. And now we'll sew these 3 rows together. So I'll put this one on top, line up these corners, match the intersection, and the seam allowances are going in opposite directions, making it easy to get it to match and helping it to lay nice and flat. And then there's just that one last piece that goes there. And we'll press both of these seam allowances to the right. Then we'll take it to the ironing board and give it a final press. We've got a nice patchwork triangle there. When you do your ironing, be sure to iron with the grain of the fabric. So we don't want to iron like that. There's a tendency to want to do that because that's the way the patchwork is shaped. But I'm going to go sideways or up and down, just sideways and up and down. Don't go this way because you can stretch it and it will distort a little bit. So try to keep ironing just this way and just that way. Those are all done. I ironed them all, and then I trimmed off the little dog ears that were sticking off here. Next step is to make some half square triangles with these two blocks. So I'm just going to mark the back side of the lighter one, put a line right across the middle, and we'll take a pair of these to the machine. We'll line up all the edges and stitch on both sides of the drawn line. This is the traditional way of making half square triangles. Stitching down one side, down the second side, and now we'll cut it in the middle and iron it open. These squares also get trimmed down just a little teeny bit. We're trimming to 3.5 inches. And then all we have to do, second side here, and then just cut off that last little dog ear there. Take one of the half square triangles and two of these matching triangles, and we're going to take them to the machine. This is very similar to the bigger triangles we made earlier. We're just going to stitch one on and then the other one on. Those are all stitched up, and I did iron them and trim that dog ear off. Next, we're going to work with all of these triangles. So we're going to get 4 of one color group. I'm going to use red, and I'm getting the matching triangle blocks here. And we're going to lay this out like so. So let's put these two in opposite corners because they're the same fabric. That will go there. Then we're going to take the patchwork block that matches, but we're going to put it on the opposite end of the block. So this one is going to end up with the same fabric because I've got it in both spots. This one will go over here, this one will go here, and we're going to stitch these pairs all together along that long edge. All we have to do is line up these two edges. You'll find that this plain triangle is a little bit oversized. So I'm just going to line up this long edge and stitch along here 1/4 inch from the cut edge there. And I'll take this over to the ironing board and cutting board before I open it up, because if I finger press this, it's going to stretch it a little bit. But you can see how easy it is to get this perfectly pointed right there because you can see where the stitching is. So if you just drive right over that, when you open this up, it'll have a nice strong corner point there. The easiest way to iron these is with the patchwork down, and then I'm just going to peel it open and gently make sure that seam is open there. Well, the seam allowances are going that way. What I mean is there's no valley here, it's all flat. Then I'm going to use the iron. I like to use it dry first to make sure it's all open, then add the seam. And now we're going to trim it down to size. To trim, line up these patchwork edges on 2 lines on your cutting board and just trim off that large triangle. Sometimes just a little bit gets trimmed off there, and then you want to make sure to keep it flat that you get any of those dog ears trimmed off as well. I've got all of those ironed up and trimmed. The next step is to take some of these big rectangles, and we're going to take these 2 of these units here, and we're going to pin them on. And it's a little bit different. I haven't seen this method before, but we're going to move this down 1 inch So I'm going to use my ruler here. Put it right on the 1-inch line there. So that's where this goes this way. And then we're going to slide it over so it's 6.5 inches from the end. So let's just put this right there. And we're going to line this up so it's 6.5 here and also 6.5 here on the bottom. Sometimes these get distorted when you iron them, so it's possible that it's curved over a little. So you just need to scooch it back so that it's ending up right there on that line. And then we're going to pin it carefully along here. And I'm going to put in 3 or 4 pins along here because I don't want it moving at all. And I'm pinning right along the line where I'm going to stitch. We're going to use the same method to pin one on the far side over here. What we want to do is stitch 1/4 inch from this edge right here. So I'm just going to carefully start stitching and take out the pins before I get to them. And what we want is when we open this up over here and iron it, we want so that all of these edges will line up. And that's how you know you did it correctly. So if they line up, go ahead and do all the rest of them. If you fold this over and it ends up like here or it's crooked or something, it's no big deal. A couple of mine that happened to. Just take the stitching out, readjust it, and do it over again. Fold these pieces over, iron them into place, and then trim off that extra back layer. That one's all done. I have to make several of those, and then we have some smaller rectangles, some of which only get those pieced pieces on the right and some on the left, and we've got several different sizes. So I'm going to go ahead and get all those finished up so we can lay out the quilt. Before we lay everything out on the table, the pattern has us make several of these sashing cornerstone rows, and then we make the border rows. So that's these pieced units here with a little bit in the middle. So I'm going to get these stitched up and then we can see what everything looks like. Everything is ready for laying out the quilt, and I think I'll start with these outer borders because that will give me some sort of anchor. So this one is going to go along the bottom. Next, I'm going to take some of the patchwork blocks. Let's start in the corner here. So we've got 4 blues, but they're not going to go right up next to themselves like that. They're going to go up to here, but there's going to be a little space between them because we've got sashing rows and a few extra pieces of sashing to add. There, that's all the blocks roughly in place. And then these pieced sashing sections, they will go between, and these little squares here will end up right in the middle of all of the sets of 4. So let me put another one of these rows down. The last step is to put these sashing pieces that go between these patchwork blocks. So once I get all of these laid out, all I have to do now is make all of these rows, sew the rows with the sashing rows, and put the borders on, and everything's going to line up and match, and it'll be really easy to get it stitched together. Then we'll get it loaded onto the quilting machine. The quilt is all loaded up, and we need to pick a thread color. There's lots of choices here, and it will drastically change the way the quilt will look. This orange, it really doesn't show up much in the patchwork, but it's going to show a lot in the borders. That might be kind of fun. There's more blue in the patchwork than any other color, And that again is going to blend in pretty well here. Show a little bit more on the edges. This is kind of a gray-green. That one just looks like a hint of color the way that Foggy Batik looks. Gold is a color I use a lot because it blends pretty well. It is going to show a little on the black and show a little bit there. The last choice would be this almost white gray. So let's see. It's going to show the most in the black. It's not going to show in the borders. I think I'm going to go with the light silver gray. For the quilting pattern, I'm using bubble play. It's just circles of different sizes, and I think that will look good against all the triangles we have in the patchwork. The Emilia quilt is all done. I've got to say, I love the shadowing in this outer border. The pattern is just really, really awesome the way it's all engineered. So I made the big size. The pattern does come with a smaller size, and it's got a different kind of shadowing around the edge and only 4 blocks, but they're both very, very nice. The circly quilting, that looks really good. It's very unobtrusive, but you can see it here. It's very cool. I used red binding, and I used a colorful print on the back. It's not one that's in the top, but the colors look like they match, and it kind of has the same theme. It's 76 by 76 inches. Very satisfying to make. Now, if you like our tutorials and you want to support us, the best thing you can do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. That really helps us out. Happy quilting! Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today I'd like to show you how to make a pattern called Beach City Blooms. We are coming into some nice warm weather, and it would be really nice to have a blanket, a quilt you could take on vacation with you. I picked out a jelly roll. This is from Moda, and it's called Coming Up Roses. It has lots of different colors and lots of different sizes of flowers. So what we need to do is we need to pick out a background color that these will show up against, because there's quite a bit of background showing. So I've got a blue and I've got a couple of aquas. I think any of these would work. It would just depend on, do I want my quilt bluer or more aqua? And I actually think the blue looks a little better, so we'll go with that one. The pattern comes with 3 sizes. We've got a throw, a twin, and a king. I'm going to make the throw, so I'm going to need 31 strips. Then we'll need 3 yards of this background, and then we'll need a couple of borders when we're done. The nice thing about this pattern is that every block is made exactly the same, and every jelly roll strip gets cut exactly the same. So I'm just going to sort them out a little, and if any are exactly the same color as the background, I will set those aside and not use them. I'm going to go ahead and get all of these cut up. It's not my pattern, so I can't give you the exact sizes, but Cozy Quilts patterns are always so easy to follow, and this one is no exception. I'm going to keep the fabric in groups. So this is one group there. Now this is the same fabric, but it'll go in a different block, these 2 pieces. And then we have a 3rd stack that gets these 3 sizes. So I'm going to go ahead and group everything up. Okay, the cutting is all done, and the items we need to make one block are 2 of these background rectangles, and then we're going to need 5 of the squares, and then we're going to need 1 group from each of these. So these are set in groups. There's 3 pieces there, so I'm taking 1 stack from here, then I need 1 from here, and I'm going to get a contrasting color. So I don't want to get the same color. Let's just dig down here a little bit. How about this one with the squares all over it? We've got those 2. And then we need something from this stack. So let's get another color. We'll get this one here. 4 of the background squares, get a line drawn on the back side of them, right across the diagonal from corner to corner. Here's all the pieces we need. I think I mentioned 2 of these, but I actually need 3 of these rectangles. First step is to take the 2 long pieces, and we are going to put one of these marked triangles on one end of each, and they go facing opposite ways. So this longer one, it's going to go that way. This shorter one is going to go that way. All we're going to do is line up everything very carefully, and then we're going to stitch almost on the line. It helps if you stitch slightly over toward the corner, because when we fold this, I'll show you. That helps, so when you fold this over, everything will meet up nicely. We'll do the same thing on this one. I like to double check after I stitch to make sure everything is going to match up, and it does. Both of these long pieces, we're going to take them to the ironing board, but we are going to press everything toward the long strip. So this is going to get pressed like that. Same with this one. Then we'll trim off that extra. Next, we're going to take the second 2 pieces, and we're going to put some squares on these. Now these go the opposite way, so the longer one we're going to face this way, and the shorter one is facing that way. And the pattern shows you exactly how to orient these. You don't have to remember this. Stitching again just to the side of that drawn line. And for these 2 strips, we are going to iron everything toward the corner. So I'm going to take all 4 of these pieces to the ironing board now. It really helps a lot when you trim off all of this excess back here. Your quilt won't weigh as much. It'll be much easier to stitch all the patchwork together. It just reduces all the extra bulk there. Now this one feels a little funny because you have to trim off from here, but we're still ending up with a nice 1/4 inch seam allowance and no extra fabric. We're ready to lay out the block now. These longer pieces, they're going to go on the outside. Next are these shorter ones, going to go right inside there. And last, we've got this 3rd color goes there, and it's surrounded by a little bit of the background. And then we've got a little more of the same color and just the last 2 rectangles there. And everything will fit as we get the seam allowances taken into account here. So let's start in the center with these 2 pieces. And it's just like putting a little puzzle together. I'm just going to check the pattern and sew everything in the order that it says to sew it in, and follow its directions for which way to put the seam allowances. So next we're going to add this. And one nice thing, there's not a lot of intersections to match. I always like that when I'm making patchwork. This piece goes next. Now we're going to have to sew these two pieces together so we can put them onto the side. And that'll fit right on there. And I'm just going to keep adding pieces, and I probably will not iron until I get all the way done. Of course, if you like to stop and use the actual iron anytime during your patchwork process here, you can. I usually wait till the block is done if it's this kind of a block. Put these two together. Add these two to the top and bottom. One last piece. Wow, it's really easy sewing. I think there was only one place where I had to make anything match, and that's right here. And look how cool that block is. So all of the blocks are like this, with fabric A, fabric B, and then fabric C goes here and here. So I'm going to get the rest stitched up, and then we can lay out the quilt. I've got the blocks all done, and we're ready to lay out the quilt. This one's kind of fun to lay out. We're going to take 4 squares, and we're going to put them with the bigger pieces in the center like this. And the quilt is on point, so you can see I've got it turned diagonally. The next block is just going to have these little guys in the center. And always when I'm laying out a quilt, I don't worry now about what colors are coming together. I just try to get the placement of the blocks done correctly so I can see what it's going to look like, and then I will go through and trade around so the colors are balanced. There, that's all the blocks, and I didn't even look at the colors. It's already blended pretty nicely. The only things I might check for is just to make sure that 2 of the same color aren't right up next to themselves. And I've got 2 plainer ones over there. I'll trade something around a little bit. The next step is to fill in these edges. So we've got corner setting triangles, and these are the smaller ones. These are going to go in all the sides to fill in. And then we have some big triangles that go in the very far corners. So these will go in all 4 of the outside corners. To put the quilt together, you can stitch everything in diagonal rows. So you can see that this is a row here. And you can make all of your rows like this, but you'll have to add these big corners at the very end because you'll have an individual row here, an individual row here. So I would make all of that first and then add the very outside corners. All I have to do after that is add some borders to go around it, and then I can get it loaded onto the quilting machine. The quilt is all loaded up, and it's time to pick a thread color. As with most of the quilts we make, there are lots of choices, and there's not a wrong choice. It's mainly a matter of personal preference. The pink is very light. I suspect it won't show at all, but that would be one option. We've got kind of an aqua green there. Again, totally blends in, which is what I like. We've got a light blue and then a little bit darker blue. Honestly, none of these are really going to show at all. think I'll go with the lightest blue here. For the quilting pattern, I'm using cockatiel feathers. I like this because it's very curvy and it fills in all the space and it's nice and even. I've got the Beach City Blooms quilt all done, and I could not be happier with how it turned out. I love the fact that all of these fabrics are showing up so nicely against the background. It really makes those pops of patchwork show up. And the quilting, this is just the style I like. A lot of little swirly quilting. It doesn't take away from any of the patchwork, it doesn't fight, but it makes a really nice shading effect here. For borders, there are 3 borders. The first one is the same as the background, which gives the effect of having this float into those other borders. I put a dark one and then this nice big light one, coordinating binding. The back side, we've got this flowery print, which is in the same Moda collection that we've got in the top. And it turned out 76 by 83, I think that's the size, let's double check. 73 by 87, and we do have a smaller size and a bigger size that the pattern will make, but this is a nice generous throw size. Now if you like our videos and you want to support us, the best thing you can do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. That really helps us out. Happy quilting! Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today I'm going to show you how to make a quilt called 3-layer cake. We've done this pattern before in a video, but I did almost the exact same colors that are on the pattern there, and I want to try it in something soft and flowery. So this is a layer cake from Moda called Jelly and Jam from Fig Tree & Company. All we need is this, and we're going to use a light background, and we're going to see how the quilt turns out. One of the things I love best about Cozy Quilt Designs patterns is that they have multiple sizes. We've got a lap, a big throw, a queen, and a king, and I'm going to make the large throw. So I'm going to need 38 of the layer cake squares. So that's almost all of them. I'm just going to pull out the really, really light ones. We'll pull out these guys. We're going to be cutting the layer cake squares into 2 different sizes. So I'm going to pull out some of the squares and they'll be cut in quarters, and that's for these bigger sections here. So I'm going to pick out the bolder prints, the prints that have a larger scale, because I think those will look nice in the big squares. Everything is cut now, and here's what we need for the first block. We need the center square, we need 2 of these that match, we need 1 of each size of the white background, and now we'll go to the machine. Here's how the block gets put together, and it always feels a little funny when you have just pieces and there's no seam allowances, because it doesn't look like the pieces are going to fit. But of course this is going to be overlapped a little, then that's going to overlap, then that will fit, and those pieces will fit. So let's start with these first two. The pattern has us iron all the seam allowances away from the center. So we've got that piece there. Now this one will fit on there exactly. I always like to put it back in place to make sure I know what goes where. This one's going to go next. And then before we sew these pieces on, we've got to stitch them together. We'll press this seam allowance toward the green, and I'm just finger pressing right now, and that will work good enough until the whole block is done. Now when we put these together, we've got those seam allowances going in opposite directions, so it's going to lay nice and flat, and it's very easy to match the intersection. That is the entire block. All I'm going to do is make a bunch of these blocks, and then we'll be ready to lay the quilt out. All the blocks are done. The layout is very easy. These are going to be all on point, so I'm not going to worry about the colors right now. I'm just going to lay out 5 blocks across and then 6 blocks up. There, that's all of the blocks, and now what I'll do is stand back and make sure I don't have too much of one color in one spot. I'm thinking there's quite a bit of the red, which is pretty prominent, showing here. Got a couple others I will trade around, but once I've got it all laid out, then I'm ready to add the side setting triangles. So that's these bigger ones here. They will go around all the edges here. And then we've got the corner triangles. They're the smaller ones that go in all 4 corners. That's all of the pieces. Still going to trade some colors around. And one thing I usually do is take a picture of it with my phone, because on my phone I can tell real easily if there's too much of one color in one spot. It's pretty easy to sew all the blocks together. That's the first row. That's the second row. This is the third row here. Once you get all the rows done, stitch them all together and then add the borders. So for the borders, I've got options here. My binding is cut the same width as my border. So one of these will be binding and one of these will be the inside border. So sometimes I will lay these out and audition them. So do I like the green border better? Or do I like the peach border better? I actually think the green is going to frame it much more nicely. It's much more vivid. And then we'll use this for the binding. So the binding will end up showing just a little teeny bit here. And I think those colors will look really good. So I'm going to finish it up and get it loaded onto the quilting machine. The quilt is all loaded up, and I've got 4 choices of threads that I think would look good on here. This is pretty much the same green that I've got in the Patrick up there. It actually will blend in pretty well. That is an option. This is a nice taupe like we've got in the borders. That's going to show some, not a whole lot. We've got this nice coral. That will not show at all in the light. It's just going to make a little bit of a shadow. And they've got a darker coral. I don't think there's a wrong choice here, but I think I'm going to go a little bit more distinct. I think we'll use the bright green. For the quilting pattern, I'm using one called Just Roses. It's pretty dense in some parts, so I'm going to make it really big. Here's what it looks like. Just one repeat of it. So there's a lot of quilting in these little parts, but I think it'll look really good, and there's roses all over these fabrics. So this should be a good choice. I've got the 3-layer cake all done, and I'm very happy how it turned out in these light, soft, flowery colors. I actually wasn't sure when I saw the quilting machine going with the green thread if it was going to be a little bit too dark. But now that the whole quilt is done, it really doesn't bother me at all, and I kind of like seeing these big flowers, and I love seeing those leaves there. So that was something a little bit different for me. I used a pretty big scale on the print here, on the quilting pattern, so it didn't make it too stiff. On the back, I used a matching floral print. That looks very pretty with it. And let's see what size this is. I made the large throw, so it's 74 by 86, but we do have a smaller and a couple of bigger sizes, so there's plenty of different sizes you can make from this pattern. Now, if you like our tutorials and you want to support us, the best thing you can do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. That really helps us out. Happy quilting! Hi everyone, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today, I'd like to show you how to make a Little Dipper Lone Star quilt. I've made bigger Lone Stars before, but this time I'm going to use little pieces, and there's going to be 9 of them in the quilt. I made this one just from some scraps. These are Hoffman batiks, but for the quilt, I'm going to use fat quarters, and I'm going to use this bundle called Brilliance from Hoffman. These are prints, and they all have a little bit of metallic accent, some silver and some gold. So let's get them ironed up and get started. I almost hate to take this bundle apart. They're folded so nicely in a star shape, but I do need to iron them all before I cut them. I always like to iron my pieces first, because then I get a nice flat piece of fabric without wrinkles, and the cuts will be much better if you just get them ironed up nice and flat. The cutting is pretty easy. You want to take your fat quarter and fold it in half. And it works best if you fold it with the right sides out, wrong sides together. Straighten it up on your cutting board, and then we're going to cut just a little piece off so we have a nice straight edge. And I like to hold it down with a weight. So I'm going to use my little dumbbell here to hold it. That keeps that from sliding. And now I'm going to cut 1.5 inch strips. So they're not very wide, but it's pretty easy to slice them all up. This is one of our free patterns, so you don't have to remember any of the numbers I'm telling you, because we will have it on our website as in our free pattern section. So you can print it off and follow along that when you're making your own quilt. We've got all of the strips cut out, and we're ready to pick out the strips for the first star. So let's start with this color here. Now I've kept them in pairs, and I need 4 pairs for the very biggest part of the first star. So I've got 4 of those. Then I need to pick out 3 sets that go on each side. So I'm going to try to get a contrasting color. This will be good, so we'll get 3 of these. And then let's try 3 of these light green for the other side. So we need 3 on the other side. And then I'm going to need 2 and 2. We'll use 2 of these light brown. And then 2 over here. This purpley navy looks good. Then we need singles, 1 for each end. And I'm going to try to get something that will show up really well. So this pink will show up really well. We can use that in the center of the star, and then on the far side we need a single. Let's do something dark. Let's do this dark red. I've already made one of the pieced diamonds, so this is what we're making. So you can see this is where I'm talking about. We needed 4 strips for the middle, 3 for here and here, 2 for here, and 1 for both tips of it. So I'm going to pick up the strips. So my first row is going to take 1 of these, 1 of these, 1 of these, and 1 of these. So I just picked them up in order, the first 4, and I'm going to fold that up. That's going to be a strip set. The next strip set, one of these, one of these, one of these, and one of these. And again, you don't have to remember any of this. It's going to be in the pattern, but I just wanted to show you how I pick these up. Third strip set is going to be these 4. And then the last strip set is going to be these 4. So we're going to take all of these strip sets, we've got 4 of them, and we're going to take them over to the sewing machine. I'm going to work with one strip unit at a time, so I'm going to put these aside. And I'm going to open these up and I'm going to make 2 strip units that are exactly the same. So we're just going to put them back in order like this. And honestly, it doesn't matter if you put them like this or if you had undone them in the other direction. So I could have laid them out like this. It makes no difference. It's going to look the same either way. So let's take the first 2 and we're going to sew them together along the long edges here using a 1/4 inch seam. And I'm just going to be careful that I don't stretch anything. They're not too long, so it's pretty easy to work with them. So I'm just putting the raw edges together. And I would recommend that you have a fairly small stitch length. I don't think you can see it there, but I'm using 10 to 12 stitches per inch. The reason I use a small stitch length is because we're going to be cutting the strip units after they're stitched. And when you cut, you don't want the seam to come undone right there. That's why I use a small stitch length. So now I'm just opening this up and I'm finger pressing right along that seam. So I'm just drawing my fingernail or the pad of my finger right along the seam. Now I'm going to get the 3rd strip and sew it on. Finger press this seam as well, and I'm doing them all to the same side. And then we'll just add the last strip, and then we'll make a 2nd strip unit exactly the same, in exactly the same order. These are the first 2, exactly the same. And then I'm going to take these other sets and stitch them together using the same process. Even though the strips are all finger pressed, we still want to iron them with our steam. So I'm going to smooth it out, and I can feel that the seams are all going the same way. And I usually use a dry iron and make sure it looks straight. And you can even slide it up against the edge of your ironing board if you've got a flat one like mine here, a rectangular one. Once I've got it flat, then I'm going to use steam. Next step is to take 2 matching strip units and put them right sides together. So I've got the same colors on top of themselves, and I'm going to line them up. And then I'm going to use a 45-degree line. Most big cutting boards have a big, long 45-degree line. And I'm going to line this up. And I'm going to start on this line here, the 30 inch. It doesn't matter where you do it, but you want to make sure that when you cut, you're beyond all of your selvages there. So I'm lining this up all the way along that line, and I'm going to make my first cut right here. Now, I don't need to use the weight to hold this down because my hand can pretty much cover all of the fabrics there. So just make a slice and then move it over 1.5 inches. So I'm using the lines that are on here and I'm moving over 1.5 inches. And I'm going to keep doing that till I've cut up the whole strip unit. I was able to get 7 here. And we've got scraps, and we're going to put these aside because we're going to use these later on. So I'm just going to set them all over here, and I'll show you what this looks like. So it's a nice pieced strip unit there. So I'm going to make two stacks of these. All of the ones that are right side down are going to go over here. And all of the right side ups are going to go over here. And for the block we're going to make right now, I only need 4 of each. So let's take the extra 3. We'll set those up here, and the extra 3 of these, and we'll set those up here. So these are going to be used in our patchwork, but we need to use that same procedure with the other strip units. So keep them in pairs like this, right sides together, and do the same cutting we just did. We've got all 4 of the strip units cut up, and you can actually flip these right side up now. They won't get mixed up with the other ones we cut because they're facing a different way. So those 4 are all going to make 1 diamond, and these 4 are going to make 1 diamond. Now, once you've got them, you got to figure out what order they go in. So this one I've already put in order, but there's only one way they will fit together to make 1 here, 2 here, 3 here, 4 here, 3 here, 2 here, and 1 here. So if you don't have something to look at and you're looking at all of these, you have to just kind of turn them around and see which way they go. But it's not as hard as it looks, but I always struggle with this part when I make new ones to figure out which way do I have them turned. Now they're always going to be going in the same order: green, rust, blue, tan. So sometimes you just have to turn them around to figure out what order they go in. I don't have it quite right yet. That's it right there. So you can see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now we're ready to sew these together. To stitch these together, let's start with these first 2 strips. So once we stitch them together, we want everything to match up if possible. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to put them right sides together, and we're going to slide this down so that when we're a 1/4 inch away from this edge, we will go right to that intersection there, and the same thing down at the bottom. I don't usually pin it because it's pretty short, but you can if you like. So I'm just going to sew. This is what I call the sew and hope method. I'm going to sew and then hope that everything lines up. I've had a little bit of practice on these, so mine will probably line up better than yours might at first. So that's almost perfect. That one's not perfect, and that one's not quite perfect. So I will adjust as I keep making these, and let me show you some that I've already made here. So this one, it's pretty well lined up. It's not perfect right there, but it's pretty close. This is an early one. So at first look, it looks great, but these are not perfectly lined up. And I'm not going to take it apart and redo it. You can if you like. I just wanted to show you, even if they're not perfect, your patchwork is still going to look good. So you can use practice strips if you want, but honestly, this is close enough for me, and I'm just going to adjust a little bit so it looks like I need to take this strip and I need to move it a little bit farther down. So we'll sew this one on now, and I'm going to just slide it a teensy bit farther down there. Hold it at the other edge also. And we'll see if we're closer. It doesn't take that long to get a pretty good feel for if they're going to match. Okay, we've got perfect there, pretty close there. So I'm going to keep sewing these together. So we've got the 4th one to put on here, and there's 4 of these diamonds that are exactly the same. So here's the first one. Pretty good, and I keep checking as I go because then it helps me adjust. So I'm going to finish the other 3 up, and we'll have 4 that look just the same. One caution: when you're sewing these strips together, the edges are all biased, so they will stretch. You don't want to stretch it when you're sewing if possible. Just place it on there and try not to stretch either one, because you can get it back in shape when you iron it, but it distorts it a little if you stretch. I'm also not finger pressing any of these seams. I'm going to take these right over to the ironing board and press them there. To iron your diamonds, you want to look at which way your grain is going. The straight grain is going like this, so it's okay for me to press all of this along the grain. So I'm using my hands to go right with the grain, and I'm just kind of smashing it with my hands, and then I'm going to use the iron to help make it all lay the way I want it to go. So I can always pull it this way right along the grain, and then I can iron it this way. I can even pull it like this. What you don't want to do is pull along this edge or this edge, because that's a bias edge and you can stretch it and it will distort. The more you stretch it, the more wonky it gets. So look at which way the threads are going, move your iron that way, and you can pull it that direction. The first 4 are all done. So in the quilt, these will be set like that because the grain is going that way. The second set that looks exactly the same is going to be laid out like this, and it's going to end up with its grain all straight also. So we're going to just sew these together using the same procedure we did on this half, but we're going to end up with 4 big diamonds going like that, and these 4 diamonds still have the straight grain going up and down. The second set of 4 diamonds, they're all pieced, and here's what the star is going to look like. We're just going to lay out every other one and spin them around, and it's going to make a really pretty star that's got a nice pink center there, and then bigger and bigger stars going all the way around. Every time we make these, we get these extra scrap pieces. These aren't enough to make a whole nother star, but as we keep cutting up sets, we will get more and more, and we're going to make some scrappy stars out of all of the extra pieces. I've gone ahead and laid out all the strips for the next set of diamonds, and I'm going to make those blocks. Then I'm going to keep making blocks with the rest of the strips and gathering up all the scraps, and then we'll get all our stars done. These are all of the diamonds for the scrappy blocks. All the big diamonds for the other blocks that have those concentric colors, those are all done as well. One thing you might want to do before moving on is trim off these little dog ears. It's pretty easy to do. You can just take your ruler here, put it along the edge, and slice off all of those all at once. You don't have to. It's kind of a matter of preference, but they do look a lot neater when those are gone. To make our block, we're going to spin these around and fill in with 2 sizes of triangles. When I made my sample block earlier, I used a big square and a small triangle, but if you do this, you have to do Y seams. That means you stitch this and stop 1/4 inch from the edge, and then you stitch this onto this side, stopping 1/4 inch, and this one here. I can do it, but I don't really enjoy doing it, and it's a little bit more difficult. It's a lot easier to add triangles. So I'm going to get 4 of each of these, and my triangles will go to the machine. Let me show you what I'm talking about when I said I have 4 of this diamond and 4 of this, because they do look exactly the same, but the grain is different on them. So I've got the straight grain here. The straight grain right there is going up and down. On this one, the straight grain is going this way. You can always flip it over and I can see which way the threads are going. And that's what we want, because when our whole star is done, we want it all to just have straight grain and no bias. Here's where these corners are going to go. One's going to go there, the small ones are going to go here and here, and then the large ones are going to go here and here. And that will make 1/4 of our star. So we'll make this 4 times, and that will give us the whole star. Here's how we stitch these on. We'll start with this triangle and this diamond. We're going to put them right sides together, and I'm going to flip the whole thing over because it's a little bit easier to see what I'm doing there. I want to slide this down. I don't want those tips even. I want it slid down. So when I sew a 1/4 inch from the edge, it'll go right where those two meet. And there's going to be extra of this triangle. The triangle is cut extra large, and that's so we can trim down the whole block when we're done. So just go right along the edge and then press the seam toward the background. Now we'll do the same thing with this pair over here. So when I put them right sides together, again, I want to start from this edge here. So this time I don't have to put it upside down. I'm just going to slide this down so that when I do the 1/4 inch seam, it'll hit that intersection right there. Now when you finger press this, you don't want to stretch it, so you can just smash it down with your fingers a little bit, but don't pull it and distort it as you go. So what we're hoping is when we open this up, we've now got one long line here, and that's pretty close. I'll put that back in place, and now we can add these bigger triangles. Let's do this one first. It's going to go right sides on this one. So again, slide it down so you've got 1/4 inch right there. And this can be finger pressed a little more firmly because these are both straight grains here. And you'll find that this almost lines up here. It's okay if it's not perfect because we're going to trim the whole block when we're done. There's that section. Now all we have to add is this one here. Again, always start at this end, don't start at that end. So I flipped it upside down and I'm stitching along here. The reason I want all the extra at the outside of the block is because my sewing is never perfect. I hope to have it perfect, but if I don't, it's okay because we've got extra here and we're going to trim the whole block. So you want to start here and have this part lined up, so when we go to put this to this, it'll be easy for us to get them together. The next step is to take these two triangles and sew them along that long center seam. So I'm going to put them right sides together, and I'm going to start in the center here. We have a lot of seam allowances here, and for this particular one, they're going in different directions, so it'll be pretty easy to match these up. You'll find as you make your stars that sometimes they will all be going the same direction, and sometimes they will be going in opposite directions. There's no way to get the whole star done where they are always nesting. But because so many of the seams are biased, like this one, even if they're going all the same way, it's still pretty easy to get them to match. That's the first quarter seam, the first quarter of the star, and I'm going to press the seam to the right here. And I'm going to make all 4 quarters, and I'm going to press this seam in that direction every time. The 4 quarters are done, and all we have to do to make a star is spin them around. Last step is to sew both of these and then sew that last long seam. And you might want to, at this point, there's dog ears here in the middle, and the middle does get pretty bulky. So I would cut those off. It isn't necessary to cut off any of the dog ears that are on the outside of the block because we're going to be trimming it when we're done, but this will help keep it from being bulky in the middle. here's the whole star, and we will iron it and we'll be able to get it nice and flat. But at this point, I like to look and see how close did everything match up. So you can see in here, it's not perfect right here, but it's pretty close. It's pretty good here. Even where it doesn't match, like right here, I can't really see it very well. Now, this right here isn't matching very well. So I could take out a little bit of this seam and try to get that lined up a little better. But I think when the star is all done and ironed, I don't think I'm going to even notice it. So I'm not going to worry about that. When I look at the block right now, it doesn't look very flat. We've got a lot of extra here. It looks like extra. But here's one I finished earlier over here. Same block, completely flat. So we can get this completely flat. It's just that it gets pulled and distorted a little bit as we're sewing. So now that we've got all the block done and all the grain going the same way, we can stretch it into place. Remember, always going this way and this way. Don't go diagonal because that's what makes it go wonky. So I'm just going to start pulling it and pressing a little sideways like this. And what's happening is everything is getting put back to its original straight grain because there's just no way to avoid stretching it a little teeny bit as you sew. So I'm going to go sideways a little bit, and now I'm going to pull it up and gently press it and keep pulling and keep pressing. And you'll see it start to flatten out. And in the middle here, you might want to press it open so that that is nice and flat there. And then remember, you can pull along the seams. And just keep pressing. Everything is just getting like magic. It's just flattening out. So I don't want you to worry if you just look at your star after it's sewn, before it's pressed, and think, this just doesn't work. Mine aren't coming out flat. I'm not a good sewer. You are a good sewer. It's just that they stretch as we're going. But look at that. All we have to do now is just trim it square. To trim our star, I'm going to put it on my cutting mat, and I'm going to line up this seam all along one line there. Then I'm going to line this up along a line as well. And then I'm going to measure out 10 inches from this middle line. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So now I'm going to cut right along here. And it's not cutting very much off, but it's making it nice and square. Now 10 inches from the center the other way is all the way over here. And this way our star will be centered in the middle of the block. But we've still got some extra around the edges, so when we add to this, we won't cut off our star tips. So I'm going to make 4 of these Scrappy stars, and I didn't even look at what was going to go where. I just mixed all the pieces up, and because there's 18 different colors, it makes a nice blend. For our other stars, our stars with the concentric colors, we're going to use exactly the same procedure, but these are going to make circles of color all the way around. Now you have options here. You can either put the blue in the middle, or you could put the pink in the middle. So you can lay it out both ways and see which one you like better. That will work with any of these. So here, I think I like the purple in the middle, but maybe I want the green in the middle. So you can play around with those a little bit. I'm going to finish up the rest of these stars, and then I'm going to show you how we're going to lay them out. I've got all the stars done. I have 5 of this style with the concentric colors and 4 scrappy ones. So here's how the quilt goes together. There's going to be space between each square, and I'm going to put these 5 in the center and in the far corners. To go between the squares, I have sashing. The sashing is made with the extra strips that I had when I cut out the star parts, along with the background on each side. So this is exactly the same length. They're 20 inches. That's how big the stars are. That's how big that piece goes in between them. So I've got a variety of colors, and I'm just going to spread them out randomly all around the edges. That's all the sashing pieces, but we've got these holes here, 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 and that's where we need to do cornerstones. So remember all of these scraps we had? We're going to take 2 of these like that, put them right sides together, line up the intersections. It doesn't matter if they're exactly the same size, just line up your intersections, stitch right there, and when you open it up, it will look like this. All you have to do now is trim it down to 3.5 inches. That's how wide all of these guys are. So here's a bunch that are trimmed to 3.5 inches. All I'm going to do is point them away from the center. So these are going away from the center, this is going away, and I'm going to fill in all those spots. That's all the patchwork. The last thing I'm going to do is add a border. So I've got this navy that's in the patchwork. That's going to go all the way around the outside. And I've got a few more of these guys. So I'm going to put one of these in each corner here for one last cornerstone. It's very easy to stitch this up. There's no matching in here. These fit on there exactly. So I'm going to go ahead and get all of this stitched up, get the borders on, and get it loaded onto the machine. The quilt is loaded on the machine, and we need to pick a thread color. I only pulled out very light colors because I'm positive that's what I want to do on here. I don't think I want anything showing up very much on this background because I think it will take away from my stars. You really can't see that light lavender one. Can't see the light gray. Blends in very well with the patchwork. The blue we might be able to see a little bit. A teeny bit with the blue. I think I will go with the gray because that matches best with these silver metallic accents. For the quilting pattern, I'm using Vicky's Feather. This is a nice overall design. I didn't want something that had a real prominent pattern, but I like the soft curves, and that will fill in all of the background space and won't fight on top of the star patchwork. I've got the Little Dipper Lone Star quilt all the way done. That's what we're going to call it, Little Dipper, because there's a lot of little stars repeated, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. I like the fact that we have this style star with the colors going around, alternating with these that are all scrappy. And the scrappy ones look really nice. You could make a whole quilt just with scraps. You could even use all your scraps and just cut them into 1.5 inch strips and make a lot of the stars. The quilting is very understated here, which is what I like. I don't like it to show very much. And this is that triple sashing. It just has the effect of making the stars look like they are floating in the middle of the sashing there, because it leaves a little bit of extra space. You can see here, my piecing is not perfectly accurate. So let me show you some places here. It doesn't match up perfectly there. There's lots of places where it doesn't match up, but it doesn't really show. So you could pick out those spots and restitch them, but honestly, when the whole quilt is done, you really can't tell it all. And the pattern is designed so you've got enough room so that these star points are probably not going to get stitched off. The quilt came out about 75 inches square, and I had a lot more of these left over, these that we cut these squares from. So you certainly could make a bunch of these and add an extra border on the top and bottom only if you wanted your quilt to be rectangular. Also, I only used 18 fat quarters. My bundle had more than 18. You can use more than 18. You can even use light ones. Just use those strips in the interior of the star, not necessarily up against the edge here where they wouldn't show very well. Here's a better look at these cornerstones. I like having it in the border there. Now my border is somewhat the same colors as the cornerstones and they don't show up really well in that last section there, but your borders might be a different color and these might pop a little more. They do pop very nicely in the quilt, and honestly, I'm not going to make this. Look at how little teeny this patchwork is here. I'm not going to make patchwork that little because it's going to be really hard to get it accurate. But because we cut it from those strip units, we get that nice teeny tiny patchwork. Now, if you like our videos and you want to support us, the best thing you can do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. That really helps us out. Happy quilting! Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today I'm going to show you how to make a pattern called Gallantly Streaming. This is really nice. The pattern can be made with either a jelly roll or a fat quarter bundle. If you use the fat quarter bundle, you're going to cut it up into 2.5 inch strips and then follow the pattern just as if you had been using strips. The pattern has instructions for 3 different sizes. I'm going to make the throw size, so that's all the fabric requirements right here. I'm going to use a jelly roll, so these strips, I'm going to need 27 strips. It calls for color 1 and color 2, and I believe that color 1 is the red part and color blue, that's color 2 is the blue. I'm just going to be using a variety of colors, so mine will be a little bit more scrappy looking than this version. This is a jelly roll from Robert Kaufman, and it's called Dreaming of Fall. It has a lot of pretty floral prints, kind of in fall colors, but honestly, there's a lot of purples and browns and blues. It's a really nice variety of colors. So I'm going to pick out some where the pattern calls for blue. I'm going to be using these purpley ones. Where the pattern calls for the red pieces, I'm going to use these golds and a couple of these light blues, and I think I'll put in a dark blue. Once you get them all sorted, the next step is to cut all of them in half, because we're just going to be working with half strips. Next step is to cut out some of the background. I'm using a solid bone because I think all of these colors will show up nicely against it. I'm also going to split some of these strips, and we're going to use these half strips along with some of our print ones to make some strip units. We'll start with these strips. We're going to put a background on each side of this printed strip. Since we're only using half strips, it's pretty easy to line them up and not get anything stretched. So I usually grab it way at the top and way down here by my stomach and just line up the edges and stitch without stretching. I'm going to press all of the seams toward the print, and I always like to finger press first because it makes it easier to iron later. So what I've got is the seam facing that way, and I'm going to pull it open and anchor with my finger here, and then I'm just going to pull my fingernail, pressing as I go while I'm stretching. There's kind of a knack to it, but it really helps keep this flat and keep that seam allowance going the way you want until you get it to the ironing board. We'll do the same thing with this second strip. For some reason, it's just a lot easier for me to finger press always in that direction. So I just spun the whole unit around, press it here and just pull the fingernail or the tip of your finger right along that seam. The next strip unit, it gets one print and two background, but the backgrounds are both going to go on one side. Use the same procedure we used last time. There's one more style of strip unit we need, and it has one print, and then we're going to put 3 of the backgrounds onto one side. Even though we finger press them, we still do want to iron them. So I like to smooth it out, make sure it's straight, dry iron, and then some steam. All 3 types of the strip sets get subcut the same, so we're going to cut them all 2.5 inches wide. So I usually like to line up multiples on my cutting board here. So I'm lining them up on one of the straight lines, and I'm staggering them a little bit so I don't get too many layers in any one spot, and none of the seams are lining up at all. Now obviously right here I could have used one big strip instead of sewing 2 strips together. Same with this guy. Instead of sewing 3 strips, I could have used a big piece of fabric, but the pattern calls for us to cut it this way, and that's because you could use a jelly roll. If you had a plain jelly roll for your background, you could use jelly roll strips here. Also, if you were using a variety of colors of backgrounds, you would get your blocks looking a little bit different here and here. Next step is to take some of our strips, and we're going to subcut them down a little bit smaller into some segments here. Now I can't give you all of the sizes because it's not my pattern, but the sizes are very clear in all of Cozy's patterns, and I found that to be true with this one as well. Okay, I've got 2 different sizes there. Next step is to take some of the background strips and cut some squares. These background squares, they're going to get stitched, all of these are going to get stitched onto these 2 pieces. And so the easiest way to do it is to draw a diagonal line right across the middle of it. So I like to use a very light pencil line. So this is the first method that I'll show you for stitching this onto here. So we can stitch right along the line and then iron it open. Second method is to take these to the ironing board, and you can fold these in half right across their diagonal and then iron it. Then we can use that ironed line as our stitching line. And there's one more method I will show you right at the sewing machine. The last method is to take a square, put it on your strip, and sew either by just eyeing it up, which is what I do, or there's some tape products like this. Let's find where the end is. And you can put this on your sewing machine, and then you can, here we go. You can use the red line and keep the corner of your square on the red line. So you line that red line up with the needle. Go straight down like this. So I can put this right at the needle hole. And the far end down here, just swivel it over till it's on that red line. And keep it there as you stitch. That way you don't have to press or draw a line before you start sewing. So the idea is for this to get folded open, everything should line up if you have it stitched right across the middle there. So I'm going to stitch all of these shorter pieces with the corner going that way. All of these longer pieces, they have the corner going the opposite way. So remember to keep that orientation correct as you stitch. Next step is to iron that piece in half there. And then just trim off the back 2 layers so you have a 1/4 inch seam allowance left. I like to use scissors, but you certainly could take it to your cutting board and use your blade if you like. Let's pull off the pieces we need for 1/4 of our block, because the whole quilt is made from these 1/4 blocks. We need 1 of each of the units that we've already made, and we'll take those over to the sewing machine. Let's put these in the correct order here. That's going to go on the top, that's on the bottom, that one there, that one there, and this one here. Okay, so what we're going to do is we'll sew these 2 together and then put this on the side. The seam allowances are all going in opposite directions, so it's pretty easy to match everything up. And we'll press this. We'll press it up. Now we'll add this piece. And we're going to press this away from this piece here. Now we'll just add the last 2 pieces. It's a pretty easy block to piece. It's not tricky. Everything fits real well. For this seam here, you might actually want to stitch it from this side, because then you can do your stitching here right where those come together, and that way you can make sure that your point doesn't get sewn off. I was able to see through because my background is pretty light, but if you have a darker background, it might be easier from that side. So let's iron this seam toward the middle. Actually, it wants to go toward the outside. Let's just make it go up there. I always try to iron in the direction that the pieces want to go, unless the pattern tells me to put them a certain way for future intersection matching. But on these, it doesn't matter. So I'm going to go ahead and press in the direction that the pieces want to go. And that's usually toward the piece that has less intersection. So there's only 1 intersection right there, but on this one, we've got 3. So we'll press this away, and then let's take it to the ironing board. It's pretty flat, so all we have to do is just make sure it's not distorted, everything is looking straight. And that's the first 1/4 block. I went ahead and stitched up a few more so you can see what it looks like when you have 4 of them. So all we have to do is spin these around, and that is what our block is going to look like. So I'm going to go ahead and get all the blocks finished, then we can lay out the quilt on the table. I've got the blocks all done and I'm ready to lay out the quilt. This quilt does have some sashing and cornerstones, so these blocks won't go right next to each other. There'll be a little space between all of them. So that's what the whole quilt is going to look like. I haven't traded around any blocks yet, and I probably will a little because I can see that I've got this same piece 3 times in a row here, so I might spin something around because they can be turned any direction. And here's what's nice about adding the cornerstones and sashing. If there were not those items, we would end up with 4 blocks together there, which is fine, looks fine, but look at how much better it looks when you add a cornerstone in the middle. It's going to make this long chain going in both directions, and it just separates the blocks a little bit. So we're going to have this solid in here and between all of them. So it is an extra step that you have to take to sew the cornerstones and sashing, but I think it improves the quilt so much. So I'm going to go ahead and lay this all out, trade blocks around if necessary, sew it into rows, sew all the rows together, I think we've got a couple of borders to add, but then I can get it onto the quilting machine. All right, I've got some thread colors picked out here. We could go with a very conservative choice here. This is not going to show at all in the background, even on the print, because there's so much going on, it won't show. I've got this nice green. There's green in a lot of the prints. That'll show a little bit. Won't show much in the dark. The gold is what I'm thinking I would like to use. It's pretty subtle there. It matches the gold we've got on the border. And this is one option. It's kind of a very dark rosy pink, and it picks up the main color. I'm just worried that this may make too much of a statement and may distract from the patchwork. So I'm going to go with the gold. For the quilting pattern, I'm doing one called Tapestry. I love the flowers and the curly leaves. Hi everyone, I went to the eye doctor this morning, so I've got to keep my sunglasses on today, but I got the Gallantly Streaming quilt all finished. I'm very happy with how it turned out. I love those big bursts of color. They look almost like they're spinning, and because there was two different shades of colors, we've got the darker ones here and either pink or gold there, it almost makes it look two-dimensional. I'm very happy with that gold thread. You can see the flowers, you can see the leaves, but it doesn't fight with the patchwork. Those two borders frame it very nicely, and the back, it's just that teeny tiny print. It's the same print that I used on the binding. Now remember, at the beginning of the video I said you could make it with a jelly roll, or you can make it with a fat quarter bundle, because many times I'll have some fat quarters and some jelly roll strips that match. Well, you can cut them all up to make the quilt. And for the background, the pattern calls for yardage, but it all gets cut up into 2.5 inch strips, and one jelly roll is enough to do all the background for the throw size, which is what I made, 68 by 86. Now, if you like our tutorials and you want to support us, the best thing you can do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. That really helps us out. Happy quilting! Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today I'm going to try making a pattern called Mirror Mirror. This is from Cozy Quilt Designs, and it uses a fat quarter bundle. So I have this nice bundle of batiks. We'll open it up. There's quite a few different colors there. And let's see what sizes we've got. We've got 5 sizes, and I'm going to make the twin size. So I need 18 fat quarters. Now my fat quarter bundle only has 16, but that's not a big problem. You can always buy a little bit extra of the fabrics you're using on the borders and cut out the pieces you need, or if you have a couple extra coordinating fat quarters like I do, you can add those in. Let's just open this up and see what all the fabrics look like. I'm hoping to get a wide range of colors, not all the same color. And we are also going to need a background. So let's see what these look like. We've got quite a few different colors, some browns and greens, and they're quite a bit different, which I think will make the patchwork look better. I honestly think this quilt will look better with more colors rather than less, and not a lot of all of the same color. This is good. We've got a lot of different colors, and then we'll be adding in the blue and that black multi. For a background, I'm going to use another batik. I'm going to use this almost solid background. This is an 1895 from Hoffman, and I think all these fabrics will show up well against that. It's always a good idea to iron your fabrics, especially fat quarters that have been folded up in a package. I'm going to cut 2 layers at a time. You can cut 1 at a time, you can cut 4 at a time, just do what you're comfortable with. Every fat quarter gets cut exactly the same, and this is the selvage edge up here, so we've got about 21, 22 inches here, 18 inches this way, and you need to turn these before you cut them so that we have enough width here to get all the cuts. I can't give you all of the exact sizes that I'm cutting because it's not my pattern, but Cozy Quilts patterns are so easy to follow and they have all the numbers that you need. We're just going to be leaving these as strips. There's no subcutting, but we do need to cut up some background. The last thing we need to do for these background strips is just cut them in half. So I'm just going to put my scissors in along the fold there and cut each one in half. For this quilt, we can just cut out a couple of blocks at a time. So we've got all the pieces we need to make the blocks in these colors. Each color is used individually in the block. You can't do that with every pattern, but when you can, I like to cut out 1 or 2 of the blocks and get those stitched up so that I can get good practice and know ahead of time if there's anything I need to watch out for, and I can really get a head start to see what's my quilt going to look like, what's the block going to look like. Let's start off with the widest batik strip here and a narrow background strip. And we're going to make a strip set. We're going to sew them together. And you'll notice, because we cut these the opposite way we normally cut strips, that your background strips are going to be a little bit longer. That's okay. You can just let that excess hang off the end there and just sew along the edge. And it helps if you don't stretch either one, because then your patchwork will lay flatter. We want to press the seam allowance toward the darker fabric. So I'm just going to pull it apart here, hold it with the palm of my hands here, and then I like to anchor it there and pull my finger right down this seam. And that will press it without stretching it, but it makes sure it's open. I'm kind of opening it as I pull down. I'm going to repeat this with the second wide strip and narrow background. Next, we'll take the medium size print here and a narrow background, and we'll sew this one on. Again, we want to press that seam allowance toward the darker color there. And then we're going to add a narrow strip on this far side here. Last thing we need to make has one medium background and one medium print. That's all the strip units we need to make the first blocks. So let's take these to the ironing board. Even though we finger pressed, your blocks will still lay flatter if you use some steam on them. So I usually use a dry iron to make sure it's flat, and then add a little steam. We're going to subcut both of these guys. Here's how I like to do that cutting. I'm going to line up the bottom of this along one of my lines, and I'll use the first line here to get a clean cut. So I'll make sure any selvages or raw edges are beyond that. And this one's going to get cut the same. So you can put it right on top of it. You can put it right here if you want, but you can lay it up here, make sure it's straight. And then I like to put my plastic ruler on top of what I have not cut yet, because it holds everything in place here. And I always line up my plastic ruler with the lines on my mat. They're perfectly straight. You can tell they're straight because they line up with your ruler. And this gives me a long thing to line up for, and I'm much less likely to have it at the wrong angle. So that's why I use this method. Then I'll hold down what I haven't cut yet, and now it hasn't moved at all. And then I will move my ruler over as many inches as I need to do the subcutting. And that way I get good clean cuts that are always at a 90-degree angle. These two strip units, even though they're different, they're going to get cut exactly the same width. Not the same as what we just did, but these two get cut the same. So I'm going to lay them on the table and cut them at the same time. All of the cutting is done now, and what we can make is 8 blocks that are exactly the same out of this one fabric. So let's take these to the machine, get that block done. That's the order the pieces will go in. It's a super easy block to make. They're pretty small when you get done, and we're going to have 8 of them, but since we've got 18 different fabrics, this particular one will be sprinkled throughout the whole quilt. There's only one intersection to match, and that's right here. Because we iron toward the dark, the seam allowances are going in opposite directions, and it's real easy to feel with your fingers if you've got that matched up. We're just going to press away, or in this direction, away from that big piece every time. Let me double check the pattern. I'm pretty sure it's going to have us press toward the dark every time. And there's more dark here. So yeah, erase what I just said. We'll press it toward this direction. The blocks will fit whichever way you press them, but we have less of a chance of having any shadowing showing back here if we press most of them toward the dark. One thing you can try if you want, when I have 8 blocks that are the same, I usually chain piece them. So I took all of them and stitched piece number 2 onto there. And now I'm taking piece number 3 and stitching it onto all of them. The advantage is it's a little bit quicker because as you sew this one on, the next piece is already in the right order. Also, you don't end up with a lot of threads between each block, and that saves you time later when you're checking your whole quilt to make sure there's no thread sticking out. When you put your blocks together, there will be a lot less of that using this method. This also makes it quicker to finger press because they're still attached. So you can just pull that one down, go to the next one, and when you have the whole string done, you can trim them apart, and then we will have all 8 blocks in this color done. Then I will cut and stitch all the other colors, and we'll be ready to lay the quilt out. All the blocks are done, and we're ready to lay out the quilt. You can put these together in groups of 4, and that will save a lot of time. But there's several different ways you can lay them out. Here's the first option. We're going to have these 4 little parts of the block coming together. Then when you make more blocks, you will see that the big parts will also come together. So we'll end up like this. We'll end up with 4 big ones together and 4 little ones together. So you can save a lot of time if you just pick out some combinations or do them at random and sew them in groups of 4. let's see, how does this go? There we go. So you want to pick your colors so that you get different colors coming together there and different colors coming together here. Let me lay a little bit more out so you can get a better idea of what the quilt looks like. So here's a little better look at more of the layout. This is the basic block right here. And when you repeat that over and over, that's what you're going to get. Now here's a second way you can lay the blocks out. You would make a bunch of blocks like this. It has kind of a pinwheel effect in the middle there, but let me show you what it looks like when you make multiples. Now we're getting a completely different shape. What we're getting now is kind of a long, dark spot of color. So it's going to give you more of a diagonal look than this one. They're both very interesting. Not sure which one I like better. I'm going to get my camera and take a picture of both because that often clinches it for me. You get a completely different view when you look at this through the camera on your phone. I'm really liking that layout. Now if we move over to this one, it's very even and balanced. That's very nice too. But I think this one is more interesting, so I'm going to lay it out like this. So all I'm going to do is put these together in fours, and I'm just going to pick the colors. So I have 4 different colors here, and I'm going to make all the blocks into these fours, and then I can lay those fours out on the table very quickly, sew them into rows, sew the rows together, add a couple borders, then we can get it loaded onto the quilting machine. The Mirror quilt is all loaded on the machine, and it's time to pick a thread color. I've got all these different neutral shades, and I think any of them will work. I don't want to get too much showing in the background, so these dark browns are probably not my first choice. They're pretty dramatic on there, but they're going to blend in everywhere else. Green, there's a lot of green in the quilt. That one still shows quite a bit, but it's fairly muted. This is a softer green. A little less stark on the light. Again, not going to show very much in any of the dark areas. And we could use it's kind of an oatmeal color. So this won't show at all in the background, but it's fairly prominent on there. I think this gray-green will be the best choice. For the quilting pattern, I'm using one called Spirals Galore. I like this because there aren't flowers on it, and I like the curviness of it. Let me show you one repeat. It's got big swirls and little swirls, and I think that'll look really good on this patchwork. I've got the Mirror quilt all done, and I know I say this at almost the end of every video. This is one of my favorite quilts to make. It was so satisfying. Each set of these little blocks stitched up very quickly, and they were very nice and accurate. And then when you put the 4 together, so here's 4 blocks together. I put sets of 4s all together, and each one is laid out exactly the same way in the quilt. That made the layout really easy because you could spin them in any direction you want to get your colors balanced. So I think the color I see the most in here is this burgundy one. So I wanted to make sure that was sprinkled throughout evenly, and I think it is. For the borders, we had this little teeny one, which is the same as the background. I like that kind of border because it makes the patchwork float a little bit. Then you've got this little border here in the green, and I love the little swirly big border. Binding is another batik. It's got a little bit of blue, a little bit of greenish blue. And then on the back side, I use this all over little teeny leaves. And the swirls look really good on that. I was actually a little concerned because the thread color is quite a bit darker than what I usually use. But I really like how it turned out. It's not saying too much. It's receding pretty well, which I like. So I think it turned out pretty good. The size, it's a big twin. I think it's 76 by 96. So that's a generous twin size. There's also a queen and a king, and there's a couple of smaller versions. Now, if you like our videos and you want to support us, the best thing you can do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. That really helps us out. Happy quilting! Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today I'm going to show you how to make the Autumn Celebration Wreath Quilt, and I'm going to make it in these exact colors. But I wanted to try it in other colors. Even though the title says Autumn Celebration, obviously you can make it in other themes. So here's a Christmas celebration, and I've used a border fabric like they show on the pattern here, but you can also do it with just fabrics. So let's go ahead, grab our fabrics, and get started. I've got a kit here. This has all the fabrics we need already cut in the amounts we need to make all the patches. Of course, you don't have to make it from a kit. We've got all the sizes you need, all the fabric amounts, so that you can cut this from your own yardage. First step is to pull all these open and then iron them nice and flat so we don't have any wrinkles before we cut. Everything is ironed up and I'm ready to cut. I can't give you all the sizes because it's not my pattern, but it's very clearly written and it's very easy to get the sizes you need. So one caution, the very first piece you have to cut has an odd size. It has a 3/16, 6 3/16. So I don't want you to panic because there's only 2 times when we have to cut that very unusual size. The size we need for this strip is 6 3/16. 3/16 is halfway between 1/8 and 1/4. So all I'm going to do is move over right here. I'm at 6 1/8. And then I'm going to move it over till I'm halfway between the 1/8 and the 1/4 mark. So it's just a little teeny movement. So I don't want you to worry when you see that odd size. There's just a few pieces that have an odd size. And hey, once the cutting is done, we never have to look at those sizes again. All the cutting is done. Now, if you're cutting a different color combination than this one, you should probably make your own little fabric chart. So they have a fabric chart here with everything titled for the colors that are in this kit. But if you're making your own, make another chart. Also, when you cut each piece, there's a letter. So they call this piece F, this piece Q, this piece C. So as you cut, it tells you what letter goes with each piece. So you can take some little sticky pieces here and you can cut those and stick them on as you go if you find that helpful. I didn't actually use those the first time I made it. I just referred to the pattern and made sure I had the right size piece. But these labels are very useful, and I'm just using Avery sticky labels here. They're that size, but you can cut off little pieces and then label them as you go. Once everything is cut and labeled, we're ready to start sewing. This is made in parts. We're going to make a center section, then we're going to make 4 sections that go right around that center, and then 4 quarters. So let's start with the middle. We're starting with A and B. And the back side of the B squares need to have a diagonal line drawn across the back of them. So I'm just going to use a light pencil line and draw it right like that. One of these is going to go on each corner, and we're just going to snowball the block. That means we're going to just stitch right along the line or just to the outside of the line. So that when we flip this over, all those edges should meet. And when you stitch just to that side of the line, because there's bulk there, it's a lot easier to get this just right. Fold those corners over, give it a nice steam press, and then we want to trim off the back 2 layers. So I'm just going to use scissors, and I'm cutting it so that I'm leaving a nice 1/4 inch seam allowance, and that way it won't be too bulky in the corners here. Next step is to make a strip unit with these green strips. I'm just putting the raw edges together, and then I'm just making sure I don't stretch the top or the bottom as I feed it into the machine. It's helpful if you finger press the seam allowance, and I want to press it toward the darker color. So for me, it's easier to put the light down and then peel it open toward the dark. Anchor it with my finger here, and then I'm just going to pull the pad of my finger or my fingernail right down that seam, and I'm kind of opening it like this as I go. That way I don't end up with any valleys here, and it's very easy to iron it. I went ahead and give just a little bit of pressing, and I'm going to do some subcutting here, and all we're going to do is cut this up, and then we're going to take these 2 at a time. We're just going to spin one around and stitch them back together. Let's add some triangles to these. It's the C fabric that we're going to be adding. We're going to add 2 of them, 1 on each side. 1 there and 1 there, so we can make a big triangle. So be sure to check that you've got your pieces turned like this and not like that. So I did keep checking the pattern to make sure they're going the right way. Just line up your corners here and leave the excess hanging off the bottom. This seam gets pressed away from the middle, and I'm going to do it right here. I'm not going to iron it right now. I'm just going to finger press it down like that. And again, line up this corner here. So you can line it up and stitch from here. I find it a little bit easier to flip it over and always start at the corner here. I'm going to trim the dog ears as I go. I'll trim that one off right now. We'll finger press this one away. And now we can get that little dog ear. And I'll repeat to make 4 of these. The big triangles, they will surround the center here. And the easiest way to get them on correctly is to mark the middle of these long sides. It's very easy to mark them. You can just fold it in half and make a little crease with your fingernail. So that will stay there long enough until I get to the sewing machine. Of course, you could put a little pencil mark on the back side if you want, but this will work pretty well for me. It's pretty easy to find the middle of this piece. So you can take a pin and put it right where those pieces come together. And then you can set that right down on that little crease mark. Push everything together and then pin it right there. Then we can straighten up this half and start sewing. And when I get to the pin, I'm going to take it out. And if you want your points to be very, very pointy and not stitched off, what you can do is when you sew right along here, let me get the light over there so you can see it a little better. If you can keep your stitching line a little bit to that side of that point there, then when you pull this open, because there's some bulk, you can still get a nice point. So we're going to press this seam toward the outside. So I'm just going to pull it over. Takes a little bit more pressing right where all that bulk is. And now I can add the other 3 sides. The center block is all done. And the next thing we're going to work on is the pieces that go on all 4 sides of the center. So we'll start with these triangles. We need 3 of the G triangles and 1 of the H triangles. And that's how they fit together. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch them up. Remember to take your stickers off first. If you don't, you can still get them out even if you stitch over them, because all those needle holes will make the paper tear away really fast. I already had that happen once today where I sewed right through that label, but it came right out with me without me having to restitch anything. I'm going to press the seam allowance toward the darker color here, and this is all bias, so you want to be a little bit careful when you press it open that you don't pull and distort it. So I'm just going to kind of smash it down a little bit, and then we'll add this just like we did earlier. Line up these corners here and let that excess hang off the bottom. Press toward the little triangle. Add this one, then we'll trim off all those dog ears and get it ironed up. These patchwork triangles will go on all 4 sides of the F blocks, and we're going to use the exact same method to stitch them on, marking the centers, that we did when we made this big block here. That's the beginning of the block. Next, we need to take these triangles and these squares, and we're going to stitch these on here and fold them over. So I'm going to go ahead and make a light pencil mark. These are going to add a nice little accent to these background triangles. So when we stitch this on here, and open it up, it's just going to make that triangle a little bit more interesting. These triangles will be stitched up with the C pieces, and we're also going to make some with the M. It's actually an M, but the M and C pieces. Those are done, and now we need to make some flying geese units. I haven't made them like this before, but we're just going to take 2 triangles that are already cut the shape we need, 2 little ones, and sew them onto 1 big one. I think it's easiest to sew this onto here first, and we can just line up the corners here. They will match exactly, and we'll have that little bit of extra hanging off all the way down here. But when you sew this on with the 1/4 inch seam, and press it toward the darker color, and I'm going to be a little bit careful because that's a bias seam. I don't want to stretch it. Now this piece will fit exact, so I'm going to line up these corners, flip the whole thing upside down, and once we get it stitched, it should all match up down here, and we'll just have a little bit of a dog ear to trim off. We've got one long line here. we've got a nice flying geese unit. Here's where all these pieces fit together. The flying geese unit is going to go on top of this block. These pieces will go on the right. These pieces will go on the left. And then we've got a couple of these J squares here that will go in the corner. So it's pretty easy to stitch all this up. We'll put these two together and sew them onto here, make one row there, and stitch it all together. Here's the 4 units that will go around the center here. So these are going to fit on all 4 sides, but we're still going to have to use the last remaining pieces we have there to make the corners. So we've got everything all around here, but this section here is missing. So let me show you where those pieces will go. The dark triangles, they're going to face each other here. We've got a printed square there, a couple of light triangles here, plain squares, and one big square. So it's very easy to sew this together, so I'm going to go ahead and get those stitched up. I've got all the patchwork done, and next I want to work on the borders. The borders are mitered, so the easiest way to sew a mitered border on is to take the long border and fold it in half so you can find the center of it. So here's the center right here, and I'm going to put that center right in the center of this long side. So that's right here. And then I'll open it up and I will pin it along this edge. I'm going to be stitching a 1/4 inch from the edge, and I'm going to use the line on the pattern here to stitch right along there. But I don't want to stitch beyond a 1/4 inch from this, from both edges. So I'm going to make a little dot right here, which is a 1/4 inch from the edge. And that's where I'm going to start stitching. I'm just going to stitch here. I'm not going to stitch off the end. And I'm going to do the same thing at the far end, way down here. Make a mark a 1/4 inch from the end. And you might find it helpful just to put a pin right there to remind you to stop sewing right there. Here's that pencil mark right there. So I'm going to take the pin out and put this under the machine, and then put my needle down right in that spot. And then I'm going to sew this way, and I'm going to back tack a little. So I'm going to go forward, backwards, and then I'm going to continue stitching the border on along the whole side. And then I'll stop and start at the far end at that pencil mark as well. Here's that second mark right there. So when I get to that, you can even move your needle up and down by hand. You can turn the flywheel by hand. When you get to that mark, then back tack just a little to anchor it all. I'm going to use that same method for the side of the quilt here. Fold it in half, find the center, put the center in the center of the quilt, and we'll pin it along this edge, and we'll make those pencil marks again. I've got it all pinned on all the way along here, and the mark I make, which is a 1/4 inch from the edge there, right there, if we fold this back, we'll see this mark is actually right where that mark is. They're in the same spot. So I've folded this border out of the way, and I'm going to stitch down here until I get to that mark, and everything should then meet in the corner. And I'll show you what it looks like after I get it stitched. There's that dot. So when I get to that dot, I'm just going to back up a little. Now we've got borders on both sides, and they're both stitched to almost exactly the same spot. I could have gone maybe one more stitch right there, but we are going to make a diagonal seam here, and that will be our miter. I'll show you how to do that now. Here's how we successfully make the miter. We fold the quilt along the diagonal, and I'm going to match up the borders here. I'm going to make sure that I am folding right from this corner where I stitched, and then I'm going to line up these borders here, flatten everything out. Perfect. Okay, so what we want to do, move it around here. We want to get a line going straight across here. So you can line up with your quilt with the center of your fold here. I've got my ruler right along the edge here, and I'm just going to slide it down so that I'm all the way off the edge there. Now I'm going to draw a line, and I'm drawing from the dot I did earlier. So I don't know if you can see the dot, but I'm going to go all the way along here. There's the dot, and I'm going to pin it here, and I'm going to stitch right along that line. So if I stitch all the way along the line, and then when I get to that pencil dot, I will stop and back up. So it's right here, and you might want to go slow or even turn that flywheel by hand. Now when we open it up, everything should match up and it should lay nice and flat. So let's see how close we got. Just about perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and put the rest of the borders on. Then we can get this loaded onto the quilting machine. I've got the quilt loaded on the machine, and it's time to pick a thread color. I'm fairly certain I'm going to use gold, but let's look at all these other colors just in case. The rust, that would show up a little bit on here, and that would be interesting because I'm going to do some sort of leafy pattern. We've got this nice warm brown, same thing, it will show up. This looked like a taupe. It's actually not matching as well as I would like. But I really think the gold, it's not going to show up much in the background, which is great. It's not going to show up on the patchwork. So I'm going to do that because we will still get a hint of the pattern just from the indentations of where the stitching is going. The pattern I'm going to quilt with is called Trip to New England, and that's because it's got these different shaped leaves, and I like the little swirls in between them. That should look really good on this quilt. The Autumn Celebration wreath quilt is all done, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. Of course, I love the border cut out of that fancy stripe. I like the way the leaves come over this here, and it almost looks like there's two borders there. It was very quick to make. I actually made the whole thing in one day, which is pretty quick considering you have to read the pattern, and there's a lot of little pieces, and I would recommend marking all the pieces like I showed you with those little teeny stickers. The quilting, it's very understated, but you can see these nice oak leaves there. I love the little swirls in between. And let's see, oh, I used a batik on the backside that has leaves, but then you can see these also, and that turned out really nice. It's about 61 inches square, so it makes a nice size for a table topper, a wall hanging, or a throw size quilt to put on your couch. Let's take a look at the Christmas version that I made. These are from Studio E, 'Tis the Season, and I did have the stripe border, which looks pretty good here with the poinsettias and that little border around it there. I love plaid bindings. Let's see what's on the back. Oh, it's a nice birdhouse print. Very cute, very cute. So this one, again, very easy to make. It's a good idea to have a strong contrast between all of these fabrics that go in the wreath and the background. But honestly, the different colors here, I wasn't sure if there was enough. I thought I might have needed more green. It might look too busy, but I think it looks great. So a really fun pattern to make, and it would look good in almost any color scheme. You wouldn't have to do a holiday color scheme. You could do blues or browns or greens. Just a really fun pattern to make. Now, if I had to pick, which one do I like better? I'm not even really sure. I like them both a lot, but I'd be interested to hear which one you like better, the autumn version or the Christmas version. You can leave a comment down below this video and let me know which is your favorite. Now, if you like our tutorials and you want to support us, the best thing you can do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. That really helps us out. Happy quilting! Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today I'm going to show you how to make a quilt called Shiny and Bright from Basic Gray. But instead of doing these muted colors, I'm going to do something that's even more subtle. We're going to use this bundle of fat quarters from Robert Kaufman. It's a holiday flourish bundle, but the prints don't really look Christmassy. They're all neutral tones, and even though some of the fabrics have poinsettias like that, when the quilt is done, it's not going to scream Christmas. It's just going to look beautiful and elegant. My fat quarter bundle has 16 different fat quarters. We're only going to need 12 of them. So I'm going to take out this one, and then I'm going to take out a couple of the almost plain dark ones. And then we're going to add some what the pattern calls low volume fabrics to go with all of these. So we'll use all of these grunges here. We'll use this grunge for the cornerstones. And then we're going to match up everything. We're going to pair these with one of the low volume guys so we can make beautiful stars. Each one of the fat quarters gets cut exactly the same way. And before I cut them, I always like to iron them nice and flat so that all of my slicing will be accurate. Since these are all cut the same, I'm going to cut 6 layers at a time. You might want to cut 1 layer, 2 layers, 3 layers, whatever you're comfortable with. And I'm holding down the end of my plastic ruler with a dumbbell because that keeps it from shifting as I cut. I can't give you all the cutting sizes because it's not my pattern, but this one is very clear and very easy to follow, so you can get all the pieces you need. All of the cutting is done, and here's what we've got going on. From the fat quarters, we've got pieces for 12 different star blocks. From the B fabrics, or the low volumes, which I'm using grunge for, I used 5 different fabrics, and we got enough for 2 different blocks from each one. Now this one I liked a lot better, so I used it twice. And what we need to do next is to pair these up. So let's say we're going to do this one with that color, and we'll do this one with that color. So I'm going to pair them up until I get them just the way I like them. There, I've got every block, so there's some contrast between the A and the B fabrics. And we're going to be working with just one block at a time. Let's start with this color here. We're going to take the bigger squares of this print. Let's see which ones those are. That's these here. And we're going to draw a line across the back side of it along the diagonal. So I'm just going to use a pencil, and I'm going to make a dark enough line so I can see it, but not too dark, just like this. I've got the A and B squares that are the same size, and honestly it might have been easier to draw on the back of these because they're plainer, but we're going to put them right sides together and make half square triangles. So to do that, we're just going to line everything up and stitch 1/4 inch away from the line on each side. We do these in a lot of quilts. It's just a very quick method for getting half square triangles, is to stitch on both sides. So I'll do that with all 4 blocks. Next step is to cut right along the drawn line so that we've got our half square triangles, and then we'll take them over to the ironing board. I like to peel them open so I can be careful that my seam stays straight. Press it a little with my hands, then add some steam. We're not going to cut off the dog ears yet because we need to trim these down to size. These are meant to turn out a little bit bigger than you need. So I'm going to line up both edges on, you can either do this on your cutting board, or if you have a rotating mat, you can do it on here. I'm going to line up the edges, and then I'm going to trim it down to 3 inches. Now it's important to trim a little bit off of one side of each of the fabrics. You don't want to have this turned like this where you're trimming off 2 of the same fabric. So put your diagonal seam on the diagonal there, line everything up, and trim it off. Now we've just got one little dog ear, and you've got your cutter in your hand. You can just trim that off like that. There is another way you can trim these down, so I want to show you one other method. For this method, you wouldn't iron it open. You would keep it closed, and you would use a triangular ruler, something like the strip tube ruler. And we're going to put the 3-inch line on the sewing line. So I'm going to line this up right on that sewing line. You can either center it and cut a little off of both sides, or you can slide it all the way over so it's lined up with this edge and trim it down like this. Because we are measuring from the seam, we have an exact 3-inch square here when we're done, and all we have to do is iron it and trim off those dog ears. So either method works great. Next step is to make some corner units, and we just need one of the dark accents and a couple little rectangles, and we need 4 of these for each block. Those 4 are finished. The next step is to make some flying geese units with the B fabric there and some background squares. So I'm going to draw on the back side of 8 of these background squares. All we have to do is line up the edges here and stitch right along the line, or maybe a teensy bit to this line, to this side of the line. And the reason you might move over a teeny bit is because when you fold the fabric, it has a little bit of bulk. It's not a piece of paper that folds entirely flat. So when you open this up, you want these edges to match with these edges. And so if you move over just a hair, it's lining up perfectly now. I would normally take this over to the ironing board and iron it open and then trim it off. But I'm going to trim it off after just finger pressing so I can show you how to do the second corner. So that one was trimmed off to 1/4 inch. It's nice and flat. And now we do the same method on the opposite corner. So we'll line up all these edges and we'll stitch just a hair to this side of the line. And that lines up very nicely. Iron that, trim off this side, and we'll do that with all 4 of these. Those are done, and we're ready to move on. The next unit we're going to make takes these triangles and 8 of the background triangles. And this is a special piecing technique, a special cutting technique. So the pattern maker recommended making a practice block first. I'm just going to go ahead and make it with my pieces here, but it is a little bit unusual. We're going to be stitching 2 of these onto this, and we need to match the center of this long side with the center of that side. So all I'm going to do is fold it here, and you can make a mark with your fingernail, or you can stick a pin in right there, whatever helps you out. Now to mark the middle of these guys, it's pretty easy. You can put it on your cutting board, just put it on one of the lines here on the bottom, and then slide it over so this is on a line. So right there, so we know this is going right through the center. You could make a little pencil mark, or you could put another pin in, but that is the middle of that right there. So I'm going to put them right sides together, and it doesn't matter on this because it's the same on both sides. And I'm going to line this up with my pin, and I'm going to pin those pieces together. Then I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for this side and pin this one on. I'm just going to stitch right along the edge here. You can start a little bit beyond your patchwork, or you can start all the way at the end. And I like to move the pin out of the way before I stitch there. And this seam will get pressed toward the background, so I'm just gently finger pressing it right now. And now I'm going to stitch the second piece on. And they're quite a bit bigger than we need, so we can do that special trimming afterward. So that's what it looks like so far. Before we iron these, I'm going to trim off this excess back here. So I'm just trimming it even with that triangle. And now I'm going to press these nice and flat. And it doesn't matter if this part is folded part way or the whole way, because we're going to be trimming that off. The first step for the trimming is to straighten across the patch even with this triangle. So I'm just going to line up my ruler along the edge of that fabric and cut off the excess parts of the background there. For the next step, I'm going to line this up on one of the lines on my cutting board, and then I'm going to take the 2 3/4 inch mark here. You might want to put your ruler like this, whatever is easiest for you to see the 2 3/4 inch mark. And we want to line that up with the tip of our patchwork right there. Now you can use one that's farther down, maybe that one. And then you can line up this line so that it's on the edge of your patchwork, so that you know you've got a straight cut here. So I've got the 2 3/4 pointing at the tip there, and I've got this lined up, and I'm going to trim off the excess here. Then I'm going to turn the block all the way around and repeat that procedure. So I'm lining it up on a straight line because it helps me keep everything square. I'm putting the 2 3/4 inch mark, we'll use this one here, right on the tip of that triangle. Then I'm making sure that I straighten this up so that I have 90 degrees that I'm cutting, and we'll trim off that side. So our block now is 5.5 inches exactly. One last thing we need to do, we're going to turn it sideways. I like to line up again on one of my lines, and we're going to trim it down to 3 inches. So we're going to end up with a 3 by 5.5 inch block that's got this triangle kind of floating in it. We're going to take these units and we're going to add some of these pieces to each of these corners. So I went ahead and drew on the back side of these, and we are going to stitch these on like this, and this is going to make a very cool block. So let's take these over to the machine and get those stitched on. I'm going to go ahead and stitch this first side on. We're just using the same method we used when we did the flying geese blocks, stitching just next to that line. And then we'll flip it toward the corner. I would normally take it to the ironing board, but I just want to show you what the block is going to look like. Now we'll add that second piece with the line going like that. And I've never made a block that looked like this before, and it's pretty cool. So what we have is a flying geese block, but it's got this little square right there in the middle. There, now we have everything we need when we add a few of these corner squares to build our first block. So here's how it goes together. This is in the very center, and then these blocks make the star point that go around this center. So you can see the points going around there. Then we've got the plain ones that go in the corners. The next thing we're going to add are the flying geese blocks, and they go around all four sides like this. And then these half square triangles, I'm going to put them in 2 by 2, and they get, I think of it as this bee color pointing towards itself. So we'll put these all the way around the edges, bees pointing to themselves. And the last thing we need to add is these patchwork squares here, and the dark color just goes in each far corner. And that is the whole block. It's pretty easy to put this together. I would do it in sections. You can do this whole row and this whole row. Then you'll need to put these two guys together, make that whole row, another row here, another row here, and that block will be done. So I'm going to go ahead and get that one stitched up and then make all my other blocks. Then we can lay out the quilt. The blocks are all done, and it's very easy to lay out the quilt. There's 3 blocks wide and 4 blocks tall. So I'm just going to lay them out, and then I will trade them around to make sure I have the colors balanced. There, I've got the colors pretty well balanced for the stars, also the backgrounds. I have them alternating a little bit. And the last thing we need here is we have cornerstones and sashing. So the cornerstones, they're going to make a nice little patchwork thing that's going to look like a 5 patch there, which is really nice. And this square is a little bigger than these, which I think will make it very interesting. And then we've got the sashing that goes between them all. So it's pretty easy to sew a quilt together when you've got sashing and cornerstones. You just make long rows. Like this row will be patchwork, sashing, patchwork, sashing. That'll be a whole row. The next row will be the sashing and cornerstones alternated. So I'm going to put all the rows together, sew those into a big quilt. Then we've got a little border and a big border, and we can get it loaded onto the quilting machine. I've got the quilt loaded onto the machine, and I know I want to do some sort of neutral color. Any of these 4 will probably all work just fine. This is kind of a taupe color. It looks a little bit darker than I think I would like. I don't want to fight with the patchwork at all. Now that will work. This one is a little bit warmer. That's not going to show, even on the dark areas, it's not going to show too much. Then I've got a nice light bone color. I think this will look the best. Since the fabrics in the quilt are Christmassy, I'm going to quilt it with holly leaves and berries. I don't think it will overwhelm the quilt, and I do like the circles with the big leaves. I've got the shiny and bright quilt all done. It's a nice size. It's 62 by 79. So it's like a twin size, a generous throw size. And I really like the way each block looks. Then we've got this, what looks like a 5 patch here in the corners that was formed with these little blocks and then the cornerstones and sashing. The low volume fabric, that's what we used where the grunge was. That is just so that we can use larger prints with more color change here and still have the star show up. There's a little bitty border that went around the patchwork and it makes it kind of float. Then we added a bigger border around that. Grunge binding. On the back I used one of the fabrics from the Festive Finery. You can't see the quilting on there because it just blends in, but on the front you can see the holly berries, you can see the holly leaves somewhere. It's a very fun quilt to make. The blocks were nice to piece. They're not super fast, they take a little bit longer, especially this part here, but it's very satisfying to make this block. It's a new technique for me with this little piece floating up, and then you never have to worry about that point getting stitched off. Now, if you like our videos and you want to support us, the best thing you can do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. It really helps us out. Happy quilting!